Hello, fellow travelers, and thank you once again for joining me on the Unbroken Ground, episode 40. The results are in. This week we're going to be talking about a idea that has flashed into my brain. I probably knew this before. I probably heard this before, but it's one of those things where a lot of times with scripture, a lot of times with wisdom, until we have a way to apply it, it just doesn't really seem to just stick out like a sore thumb. And so this is my week. I've been doing some learning and trying to figure out some things, and I listened to a podcast, LinkedIn learning course, I guess more than a podcast, by Seth Godin, and he interviewed. I'm going to say her name wrong. I think a lady with the last name of Davies, but I'll look it up and find it later. Doesn't matter. There's books and stuff. I will put out there on the in the show notes. Annie Davis, maybe it's Annie Davis. That's who it is, I think. Anyway, she's a world famous poker player who writes about making decisions. And as I was listening to that, one of the things they said was clarifying on how you determine whether the decision was good or bad. And like a lightning bolt, my brain started working overtime. So we're going to talk about that this week. If you're already there, congratulations, you're ahead of me. No secret, no surprise there. But it is what's been on my brain lately. Cool things are happening. Last week I put out a begging request to those who could like the Facebook page, because we are almost to 100 likes of the page as of 8:32 p.m. As of 8:32 p.m., there were 99 likes. So if you listen to the podcast and you haven't gone over, if you have a Facebook account, if you haven't gone over to the Facebook / The Unbroken Ground, you could be, depending on how quickly you react to this, you could be the 100th follower. And there is absolutely no prizes or prestige with that. It is, but other than, hey, you could be it. You could, I guess, put that on a resume or LinkedIn. You are the 100th follower of the Unbroken Ground, and watch the job offers pour in. Probably not. So if you do want to have further conversation, as always, you can find me at Facebook / The Unbroken Ground, or you can email at theunbrokenground@gmail.com. And yeah, we're going to jump into resulting and how we determine what is a good or bad decision. So, like I said in the intro, I am thinking through the idea of what makes a decision good or bad. And one of the things that has just gone off like a light bulb in my head is the idea that we shouldn't use the results of a decision to solely determine whether that decision was good or bad, because that's called resulting. And so that's just using the results to determine to basically say a decision is good if it gets good results, it's bad if it gets bad results. But that's actually not true. That's actually not true. There are good decisions that may have bad results. And so, for example, one of the people in the course Annie was talking about, I think, is the idea of getting in a car and driving. Now, if you get in a car and you drive, you may end up in an accident. And if that happens, that's bad. But your decision to get into a car and drive is not bad. Because one of the things that drives us is if we see a decision as bad, then we say, well, we can't make that decision or continue to make those type of decisions. But obviously, just because you get in one car accident doesn't mean that you should never get in a car and drive again. Now, there are some nuances to this, right? If you knew that you were about to go drive into the worst blizzard, blackout, whiteout blizzard, and driving conditions were terrible, then you might indeed say that getting into the car and driving when they're saying, please don't drive, everybody stay at home, might be a bad decision. But you could actually, with good luck and maybe some skill in driving, you could make it to your destination. That doesn't make it a good decision just because you made it to your destination with no accident. It's still a bad decision if you're driving, or could be considered a bad decision depending on what they're saying. So we can't rely solely on the results to determine whether ideas were good or bad. The way that we determine whether an idea is good or bad is based on how you arrived at the decision. And so when we push that back, what that does then is it allows us to begin to evaluate the decisions we make, and thus hopefully increasing the positive outcomes, because we're evaluating not just what happened, but the positive outcomes. And so I think about this when I think about a good example of this. Annie, who plays poker, obviously uses poker as an example, but it's less applicable to me. I'm not as much of a poker player. So if you play some Texas Hold'em somewhere and you want to probably win money from somebody, I'm probably the guy that you want there, because I don't know how all the ways that it works. But I am going to use the example of football because I like football, and there's lots of people who do, and it's easy. It's an easy skill to translate. So, for example, when a quarterback decides to have a pass play, they have to decide what receiver they're going to throw it to. And a lot of times we try to simplify things, and it's like, well, if they completed the pass, that's a good decision. But that's not necessarily true. So there's some different categories here. Here's some things to think about. So on a play, the quarterback is going to pass the ball. Now, it could be a good decision to throw to a receiver who is open and who has the ability to get a first down or a touchdown or a significant chunk of yards. And this, is always going to also depend upon what down it is and how many yards you need. But that could be a good decision. So let's just say straightforward, if the player is open, it's a good decision to throw the ball to that person. Now, there are a couple of things that can happen within this. So it's a good decision to throw the open player, but the quarterback could not execute properly, and they may overthrow that player, or they may underthrow that player, leading to an incomplete pass. Or they may execute properly, but it may hit the receiver in the hands and drop, again, being an incomplete pass. Or they may underthrow, the receiver drops the ball, and it's intercepted. Still, all that doesn't change the fact, whether it's caught or not, whether it's a good decision to throw the ball to that open receiver who's in a place to either get yards or score a touchdown. That's a good decision, regardless of whether the actual results that come in are the results that you get. So you could say, okay, well then 9 times out of 10, that's gonna be a successful play, and so we're gonna want to do that. We're gonna repeat that. Now, there's also the opposite of that. So without nuancing, we'll say that there's a bad decision. So the player is not open and the quarterback throws them the ball. So there may still, even though the player is not open, they're in good coverage. They're not really. That's not so they're being covered. So it means it's going to drive down the rate of success. Now, that because they are being covered, you could say this is a bad decision. The quarterback may still, and let's say it's good coverage, it's good defense, you shouldn't throw the ball there. the quarterback may still complete the pass. He may execute in such a way that even though there's good coverage, he outthrows the coverage. He throws it to the player. The player catches it. The player may make an amazing move and catch the ball. So even though this may be a bad decision, it can still have a good result. But by and far, what you want to think about is that you wouldn't necessarily want to repeat that process because it is a bad decision that sometimes can have good results, but the majority you should expect it to have poor results. So if you're throwing the ball into coverage, you expect that it's going to be an incomplete pass or it's going to be an interception. There are those times when, again, players that are individually skilled, able to defy the odds. Quarterbacks throwing balls where they to players and those players catching them when they shouldn't. Those things happen. But thinking about, like, was this a good decision? And the idea is, like, no, this is not a good decision. Now, you may have made a good throw. You may have the defensive may not have played up to their potential, so the pass was completed, but it doesn't make it a good decision. And so I think hopefully then you begin to see how this relates back to our life. So one of the things that I've seen, that I've gone through lately, that's caused me to evaluate a lot of decision making is there's just been some things at my work, some decisions that had to be made, and I think they were done well. But it was just a revelation to think about that when we talk about this decision, a lot of times I think what we're thinking of is, was it successful? Well, no. Then was it a bad decision? And really the answer is maybe, because I don't know all the history. Was it a bad decision? I do know that we've taken steps to make better decisions into the future. And I think that is the point of going back to analyzing how you came to your decision, regardless of whether it worked or not, regardless of whether you got the results that you wanted, because on average, if you're continuously making bad decisions, you're eventually going to miss. You're eventually going to fail. You're going to get the results that you're paying into. Now, you may avoid that. There are some people that you're like, you just make bad decision after bad decision after bad decision, and yet you don't see the consequences. But by and far, the law of averages, the universe is slow and it grinds and it gets there. But by and far, if you're making bad decisions because you are not taking the time to consider the decision, then you're going to get bad results. Now, the reverse then ought to be true. If you are making good decisions, there are some times where it's the right decision. It's a good decision. It's just not going to work. But the law of averages, the way the world just turns, if you are continually making good decisions, you will see the things happen as they should. Now, there's no guarantee, obviously. There is some execution. So if you make good decisions but you can't execute, then you've got to put them both together. You can't just because you have good decisions doesn't mean that you can coast. You can't have good decisions and then have poor execution. Because even if you're making good decisions, if your execution is poor, then it's going to affect the results of those decisions. And the same thing, you can make up for some bad decisions with good execution, with some skills, with some talent, with some energy. It just takes more. It just drains the system if you're always making up for rather than utilizing those strengths to do more. You're having to catch up because you're making bad decisions on the back end. So how do we determine what is a good decision? And I think it's just instructive that what we say, what is said is that it's the process by which you arrived to the decision. That's how you determine whether a decision is good or bad. Did you take the time to research all the opportunities, the possibilities? Did you take the time to ask wisdom of people? Did you take the time, if we're going to throw a spiritual aspect into it, did you take the time to pray about it, to see what your spirit says, what you hear from God about it? Did you take the time to count the cost? And if you did all of that and you gathered all the possible information, because to be honest, in a perfect world, we would have all the information that we need in order to make decisions without having any mystery or a percentage where it's like, well, we don't know what's going to occur because we just can't see the future. But if you can put together all possible sources, all possible data, and sometimes you just have to make a decision, then if you do that and you do that in a systematic way, then you can be confident that you're making a good decision. Now, it may not get you the results you want. Again, execution, bad luck, some other factor may come in there, and you may not get the results and success that you want. But you, by and far, if you use a process to arrive at good decisions, then you will get good results. Likewise, inversely, if you don't take time to figure out all the resources, ask all the right questions, determine all the opportunities, if you don't do all of that and you just rush through there, you don't ask for counsel from anybody, you don't ask for wisdom, you don't seek wisdom from wise people, you don't do any of that, it's a bad decision. You're making bad decisions because of the process, and when you make bad decisions because of the process, then you can expect to have bad results. Now, you may execute better and you may out-execute your decision making, but eventually the law of averages bring that down, and you're going to suffer, and it takes more energy, it takes more of a toll. So we have to concentrate on how we make decisions and why we make those decisions, and do our best to make good ones and have a process to understand what that looks like, because when we don't, some people are like, oh, I just go with my gut. Well, sometimes that works. But just because it works sometimes doesn't mean it works all times. And then do you even understand? Like, do you even understand is that repeatable? So you can't repeat that. So like, oh, well, how did you make the decision? Well, I just went with my gut. Well, you can't repeat that. So how do you do that? How do you take that and go again and again and again down the road? You don't have a process. You're just saying, oh, I just, you suddenly become the only person that can make a decision because your gut is what makes the decision. So in order to avoid that, we ought to put together a systematic way of understanding how to make decisions. And one of the things that I love, because this is what Seth was really talking about, is that we have to understand that our past decisions don't have to weigh us down. We don't have to live in them. Seth talks about it like this, and I think it's a great idea, is that you are given a gift from your former self with these decisions and with these things that you've done, and this capital that you've sunk into these sunken costs that you've done into these ideas and these decisions, and you've tried. And he's like, it's a gift, but you don't have to accept the gift. You can say, no, thank you to your former self. To say, oh, that seemed like a good gift at the time, but now it's not. You say, oh, I'm good, thank you. You can reject that gift because that is how you avoid, because for most people, this is statistics show that quitting at the right time feels like that they are quitting too early, and we have I think especially in conservative circles and Christian circles, we pound into our culture this idea of like, don't be a quitter, don't give up on things. It's gonna work. Just keep grinding. Just keep going. Don't quit. And I think that some of that comes from this idea that there is a faith issue. There's a faith tie into that. That if God is in the midst of something, so if we're taking a spiritual, I mean, you can make decisions and you don't even have to include God. There's people that do that all the time. There's people in the business world that don't give a second thought to what God might want for their business or what God might want for their life or their career. So we have to admit that there are decisions that are being made, and sometimes even good decisions are being made outside of the will of God, in the sense of that it's not even being considered. But as we think about this spiritually, we have this I think third component of faith, which is when we make decisions, when we pray about it, and we feel like God is leading us in a way. There is kind of this sense of like, well, if God is for it, then God will make it succeed. And so we can't quit early. We got to persevere. We got to keep going, because we're waiting on God to make sure that whatever decision we made, whatever that's led to, we're waiting for Him to show up and accomplish what He wants to accomplish. Now, couple of things here. As a former pastor, as a former youth minister, as a former summer camp director, here is some pitfalls when we think about the spiritual side of decision making and expectations that God's going to show up. Okay, number one, our expectations far too often are wrapped up in numbers that are not applicable to God's plan. Our expectations are far too often wrapped up into numbers that make us feel good and make us look good and make our name go up, but they're not necessarily tied to God's plan. Now, again, I don't know that they are or aren't, but it is, I think, it's important to realize that God doesn't call us to decisions and to carry out decisions so for a number. He calls us to be faithful. He calls us to be faithful. I mean, and that's what it says. It says that one day when He returns, He will say, "Well done, you good and you faithful servant." So He calls us to be faithful. So whether that faithfulness leads to a revival of thousands of millions of people, or whether that faithfulness leads to 3 people, the glory is still all to God, and the calling is not to large crowds, not to huge numbers that wow even people on the outside, but to be faithful, whether it results in a large crowd. If God is calling you to something, then your response is to be faithful, whether or not it brings about hundreds or tens or one person closer to God. You don't have to worry about that. I mean, it's in our world where we look at success and when we measure decisions, whether they're good or bad, based on the numbers about them, and that success is what numerical value did you get? That's when we wrap faith up into this idea that we need, if God is in it, then He's going to make it, He's going to multiply it, and He might. And our names are going to be attached to that. And really what if God's in it, He's saying, hey, you go be faithful. You go be faithful. Paul says this. He says, I'm so glad. He says this in this letter to the Corinthians, right? He goes, I'm so glad that I didn't really baptize many of you, because you guys are there having some argument about, well, Paul baptized me, or this person baptized me, or that person baptized me. He's like, that's not what it's about. You were baptized in the name of Jesus Christ. It's not anything about what Paul can do. It's not anything about what another apostle or another church leader can do, or it's about what God has done. And so we are called to be faithful, and some are called and they will see their faithfulness rewarded 10-fold, 100-fold, 1,000,000-fold, and some will not see much at all. I mean, that's what the book of Hebrews talks about. He says there's some that they receive their dead back, and then there are those who are still that wandered destitute, broken in the desert where they're sawn into by swords, and they did not see their reward, and they were not, and the world was not worthy of them. They were faithful, even if they didn't get what they deserved, what had been promised. That promise was not yet theirs, but it will be one day, because they were faithful. And so we have to remember that. So when we think back, we go, okay, we're making this decision. God's involved. We feel like God's calling us to do this. Then he's calling us to be faithful and not numerical. He's calling us to be faithful and not numbers focused. Now look, we always have to have this discussion, right? Somebody goes, well, numbers are important because each one of those numbers is a soul. And you're right. Numbers are important because souls are important. But here's the deal. Numbers are not important when it's just tied to your name. And so much of our culture has tied numbers to, is someone a good pastor? Well, I don't know. How big is their church? How many people have gotten baptized? How many people join their church? How many people, what's their budget? What kind of satellite church action do they got going? What are they doing? But God doesn't judge us that way. He judges us by whether we're faithful or not. That's what he calls us to do. And so it's just important, whether you're a pastor of 10 or you're a pastor of 10 million, your call is to be faithful. And when you miss that, then it leads to just really bad decisions. And I think too, on that side, what that allows, when we think about that, is it allows for us to try things and just be okay with things that don't work. It allows us to have the freedom and the creativity to try things and go, oh, that didn't work. Oh, well, do you think God called us to do that? Yeah, I mean, that's what God was calling us. We prayed. That's where God led us. That's what our hearts were. Well, if God wanted you to do that, wouldn't he just make it successful? And that's, maybe, but maybe not. And one of the things that sticks out to me when I think about this is a story, is found in the story when Jesus sends his disciples out. And here's this interesting thing that he says to them. He says, go out to the cities and go proclaim. Now they're going to the Jewish cities, and they're going to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, who has come. And when they get there, they're to find a house, and they're just there to, they're to say, hey, can I stay here? And if they welcome you in there, then you stay there, and you don't worry about whether there's a nicer house somewhere or whether somebody has a better cook, so you could go stay there. And he said, you stay there. And then when you get ready, you move on to the next city. It said, if you go to a city and you say, the peace upon you, and they don't return that peace to you, it says this, it says, shake the dust off your sandal and move on. Now, did you catch that? Jesus sends his disciples out, and he says sometimes it's just not going to work. You're going to get somewhere, and you're going to want to say, hey, I want to tell you about the good news. I want to tell you about the Messiah, that Jesus Christ is here, and the kingdom is here and near, and you can be a part of that. And some people are just not going to listen. And so what do? You shake the sandals, you shake the sand off your sandals, and you move on to the next place. Now, woe to those places that don't listen. And obviously, we're not necessarily like trying to pull in a parallel where we're saying, oh yeah, let's write off some places, right? Like there's some deep places that just don't have a whole lot of Christianity left in them. Let's write them off. Let's shake the sand off our sandals. It's not what it's saying, but I think it's intriguing. It's intriguing that we assume that every program or initiative or idea that we have as Christians, that we try as churches, we're like, oh, it's going to work. And if it doesn't, then we begin to question, well, is that really what God wanted? And I think that, again, we go back to, well, how do we make the decision? And did we research it? Did we ask for wisdom? Did we pray about it? Did we get a council of voices? Did we consider all the opportunities and all the options? And did we then make the best decision we could? And if the answer is yes, then you go, yeah, it was a good decision. Oh, it didn't work like we wanted it to. Yeah. I mean, think about like Elijah. Like Elijah calls down fire from heaven. He calls down fire from heaven. God grants his prayer. Fire comes down from heaven, and they have this short-lived revival where they kill all the prophets of Baal. Next morning, maybe even that evening, Jezebel goes, you know what, Elijah? God strike me down if I don't kill you before the day is done. And do you know what Elijah does? You've probably heard me talk about this before. It's one of my favorite stories. Elijah runs. Elijah runs. And you go, Elijah, you just called down fire from heaven. God heard you. And I think part of the crushing thing for Elijah is that he was so set on the hope that if he was able to do this thing, he was able to see, he was able to have this showdown between Baal and him and the prophets, and quite frankly, he's like, look, God showed up and it changed a few people maybe, but it really didn't change the culture or the reality. And Elijah was still persona non grata. Elijah was still had a death threat over him. And so he ran. God was in that, obviously. I mean, you don't pray and fire come down and consume a water-soaked altar and a water-soaked cow if God's not in that moment. But you know what? It wasn't a great moment of revival for Israel. When Elijah finally ends up on his journey, he goes and he has this moment, and God's like, "Why are you here, Elijah?" And Elijah's like, "I am the last. Woe is me. It's just failure. You know, it didn't work. It didn't. I'm so tired." And God says, "Oh, Elijah," he says, "Don't worry. There's a remnant, right? There's a remnant." But God, you orchestrated so that fire came down from heaven. Elijah was like, I said the great speech. I was like, choose this day who you will serve. And everybody was like, yeah, we're serving God. But then the reality set in, and the king and the queen were still corrupt, and they wanted Elijah dead. And God was like, yeah, you did. You were faithful. You were faithful. And there is still a faithful remnant. But it's not time yet. It's not time yet. I mean, that's a successful moment. He called down fire to burn up an altar. But it didn't lead to a lot of conversions. It didn't really bring people back to this faith in God like he wanted it to. And so Elijah was human, and he ran. He was afraid. Even Jesus, it says that Jesus was not able to do many miracles in his own hometown because people simply lacked the faith. Even Jesus had his effectiveness stunted by the lack of faith of the people of his hometown. Even Jesus was not 100% successful. There are times when Jesus calls people and then they count the cost and they turn away. Was it a good decision to tell them the things that Jesus told? I would argue that Jesus always made good decisions. He always chose wisely. He always considered and knew. And yeah, but it didn't always work. So he calls us to be faithful. And I think that part of the danger of labeling success as being focusing on the results is that we don't actually learn why. We don't learn how to change. When we focus on how we made the decision, we learn the factors that piled in that put us into the eventual place that we got. We can determine maybe it was just poor execution. Maybe it was bad luck. We made a good decision. This was a good thing to do. We should have done this. It just didn't work. It was bad luck. And it gets hard when we throw in like a spiritual conversation, because you have people that are like, hey, God doesn't fail. And you're like, yeah, God's love never fails. But we don't have the hindsight, the foresight, or the million-mile up view to understand how the world is working and how it should work. So it's hard for us to know. If God calls to do something, we say, oh, we want it to be successful, then we've got our ways that we try to measure it. But really, the only way to measure it is, were we faithful? Were we faithful? If you're faithful, if you've been faithful, then you're honoring what God is calling you to do. If you have 10 talents and you're faithful to invest those talents and you get more talents back, you're good. You're being faithful. But we focus so much on the numbers, and we worry, and if something doesn't work, we allow that failure to cause us to not be creative, to not continue to do things, because we want to be safe, because failure seems to set poorly in our minds, and then we think, did God not want us to do that? And it's like, I don't know. How did you pray about it? Is that where did you have a council of wisdom that got together and you guys decided, yeah, this is what God's leading us to do, and then that's what you did? And just because it wasn't successful, is that you just can't determine. You have to go, we were faithful. This is what we felt God was leading us to do. It didn't work out like we wanted it to, but it's okay. Tomorrow we're going to wake up, we're going to pray, we're going to seek new ways to be faithful. And we're going to grow. And so that's how you get back to this. How do you make good decisions? Like, is this a good decision? It's whether or not you put into the time to consider all the alternatives, the facts, the things that you can know, the things you can't know, and the prayer. That's how you make good decisions. Whether or not they turn out the results that you want, if you make a good decision, you can get bad results. Sometimes it's execution, poor execution. Sometimes it's just bad luck. Sometimes it just doesn't work. But it doesn't change the way you make decisions. If you continuously make bad decisions, you can expect that things will not go the way you want them to do. As Christians, though, we are called to be faithful to what God's doing. And so that's it, right? God, May this prayer be yours this week. God, show me how I can be creative and where you want me to be faithful, regardless of the results, regardless of the things that I can see. God, we know that you're moving. We know you're at work. God, show me where I can be faithful. Allow me to be wise. This is what Jesus says, right? He says, be innocent as doves, but wise as serpents. Like, be wise, but not cynical. Be wise, but not like doomsayers. Be wise, but also like a child, expectant, hopeful, joyful. Hold those things together. And that's my prayer for you this week as we think about the results. May we determine that we were successful because we were faithful and because we were wise. And if you need to find wisdom, James says this: if you lack wisdom, pray for it and he will give it to you. If you're having to make decisions and you don't know if you've got wisdom, pray for it and God will give it to you. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you join that prayer. God, allow us to be faithful. Allow us to be wise. Allow us to seek ways that we can be creative and encourage others around us, for you, for your name. God, show us not just success, but faithfulness. As we are faithful, God, we know that you are far, far beyond faithful. That's my prayer for you guys this week, guys, and I hope you pray that, join that in me this week, and let me know. Let me know if you've got any updates, questions, thoughts, or if you see ways that God's faithful this coming week, and you want to share that. God bless, and we'll see you next week.